Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarita V, and today we are talking about Peter Pan detachable collars. Now, does YouTube need another Peter Pan detachable collar tutorial? Why, yes. Yes, it does. And the reason why is because there's a lot of really easy ones to make, but they're not very good. And then there's a lot of how to make a Peter Pan collar and attach it to a garment that you might be making. Like you might actually have the pattern, you have like the base of your shirt and you actually need to make a Peter Pan collar. But I don't want to do that in either situation. So what I want is a high quality detachable collar made out of like cotton, satin, maybe a two-part piece of fabric. And what happens with that is that it gets a little bit more challenging with how you turn it inside out. So today we're talking, we're going to make two different versions depending on what you like and what you want how you want your shirt to be. And I never want to be critical of anybody else and any content that they make, but I can show you a couple of different options and why I don't like them. The first is I don't love. I think a Peter Pan collar is just so quaint. You can even find them as listed as baby collars, so they definitely have some kind of immaturity or childish type connotations with it, right? But I just think that they're so sweet. It's a really cool way. I like it, the juxtaposition between like rockabilly with a Peter Pan collar. If you have like a really cool t-shirt with a graphic tee and you can pull off a Peter Pan collar with that, like that's a really cool look. I really like decorative prints with just I've seen people with like polka dots or plaids or with the contrasting color, and I really like the way that looks. And I really like the idea of using, like I've got two shirts here. These are a crew neck here. This is like a cotton wool Old Navy. It's kind of like a long sleeve t-shirt, really thin sweater. I love this sweater, especially during the fall and springtime, because it's just so thin. It's very warm. It almost feels like a base layer. And if I could just spruce it up a little bit with a collar, that would be great. It's actually too thin to wear under another shirt. So, you can see all the buttons and, if you have a pocket underneath, it doesn't look very crisp. So I think making a Peter Pan collar for this would be great. I have some white sateen fabric left over from my Agent Carter collar that I made, that white detachable collar. So I'm going to make a Peter Pan detachable collar for this guy. And then this here is I think it is a base layer. It's it's a little bit thicker than this sweater, but I don't know. It feels like long johns almost. So it's kind of this weird kind of thin sweater again, and I think that it would just be really nice to wear for fall time, just kind of as a t-shirt as it cools down. And then I want to actually do this with a little bit, it'll be kind of a Halloween-y type collar, but I've got this really cool crow fabric. Now, to me, I love crows and ravens, and crows are not associated with Halloween for me. The campus that I work on has 15,000 crows that sleep there every single night. So they leave in the morning and they come back at night as I'm usually leaving for work. And it's just a really weird phenomenon. I'll try and get some footage and put some up. Of course, I've been remote since March, so I haven't been on campus, haven't seen the crows for a little while. So I think this will be a nice tribute to them to wear on my neckline, and I can wear it for the Halloween season. So that is a nice fabric. And then also, if you are thinking about making something small for Halloween and you just don't know what to do, you can always do a Wednesday Peter Pan collar, do a white collar. You don't even need a black dress. You could probably pull off a black shirt with a black skirt and braid your hair, and you probably could pull it off in, 30 minutes to an hour. So I actually started this collar earlier and I was really discouraged by how it was coming out. What I really want is a really crisp collar where it comes to a point, but you don't actually see any base at the top. We're going to make these collars two ways. One is we're going to just have a very simple button in the front or closure from the front. So you're going to have a full collar all the way around the back. And then you can have a button closure, or you could tie a ribbon and a bow. I am not a ribbon and a bow kind of gal, but if you are, you go for it. Like I said, I like really like clean, preppy look, right? And to me, a bow is a little bit too feminine. For the back side, you can do the same thing. You can have it come to a really concise point up in the front, and then in the back you can tie it with a ribbon or, again, a button closure. I've seen closures where they'll use the hook and eye. In the back, to me, that's fine because you can't really see it. In the front, I haven't liked them because you can see the little bit of metal. You can never match up a hook and eye just right, so you actually don't see it. It's just, I don't know if it can even be done. So that's the reason why I would never use it in the front. I'll leave a link in the description below of where you can pull off the PDF, and if you're watching this somewhere else, some random time, you can go to my website, saritav.com/YouTube, and it will be below my video description on there. For materials, what you'd want is your fabric. So I'm making a white one and a print one. A 1/4 yard should be plenty. Like I said, this year's remnant from a different project. And then depending on the thickness of your fabric, you could use some interfacing, iron-on interfacing to thicken it. And then the last thing that you'll want is some kind of button, some kind of closure. So closure ideas are ribbons. I'm going to use like a pearl button or like a button with a post shank on it. And then I'm going to use some elastic, just some elastic thread or cord that's really, really small so that those can just hook on. Yeah, you can use a hook and eye for the back closure. So there's a lot of options. So just get creative with it, but we'll at least focus on these two options. So. Oh, the last thing is I do have this Peter Pan collar on a garment that I have. It's a little bit lower, so, but I just have it just in case I want to look at the angle of the curve of it, but I don't think it's a perfect match, but it'll be a good starting point that I can use. The first thing I'm going to do is make a pattern from my existing garment. So you can do this at home and make your own pattern. You can also print off the pattern that I have in the description and just adjust it from there. So here I'm marking the halfway points of both the back collar and the front collar on the crew neck. So I just do that by folding the garment in half and marking it with a pin. That way I only have to make 1/2 of a collar. The next thing here, I'm going to be lining up the top hem of the shoulder so it's very precise, so I know exactly where the top of the shoulder is. Then I'm going to start making my pattern. So I'm going to just use some plain paper. I've got some tracing paper. You can trace it just on your own, but this was probably the fastest and easiest way. So I'm marking the edges, and then here I'm going to mark 2 inches from the back of the collar. I'm working on the back collar right now. And this here is going to give me a really good idea of what it looks like. And you can't see it, so I'm going to pencil it out for you. The middle part's going to be on the fold for my base pattern, and we'll adjust that in one of the future patterns. And here I'm just curving it out so it looks good, so it's a 2-inch mark from the edge. And I decided to kind of pivot it right on that very edge corner just to make sure that it's a good little circle there. Then I'm going to mark out a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm doing that with just the Sharpie, and that way you guys can see it really well, and just following a 1/4 inch from the edge. So there you go. And then I'm going to do the same exact thing with the front. So I'm tracing out the front neckline. And then I kind of just eyeballed the 2 inches. I can go in more precisely with the ruler. So here I'm marking it out with my pencil so that you guys can see it again. I'm marking 2 inches down. And that's going to be the front middle. But I ended up not really using that front mark. But it just kind of gives you a guide. And then here I'm doing the same thing as the back, 2 inches from that neckline so it's nice and even. And then I'm just going to smooth it out. And now I'm kind of etching in the little curve. And I was having a hard time, so I just used that garment that I had, but it was a little too pointy. So I ended up rounding it off really nicely. And you just kind of got to eyeball that. Now I'm going to, again, mark in the 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around, and I just kind of dotted it, and then I did a smooth line myself. And this is just like the basics for tracing your garment out, and we're going to adjust the pattern just a little bit depending if we're doing a back button or a front button. All right, and that's all done. Now I'm going to cut it out. So I'm a very visual person, so I wanted to see this piece in its entirety. So I attached 2 pieces of 8.5 by 11 paper and taped them in the center. And I'm going to put my fold line right on that middle piece. That way when I cut it out, I can see the full shape of the collar. And I had to flip it around backwards, the pattern piece. But here you can see I'm tracing around it now. And it didn't turn out perfect, so I kind of smoothed out that edge, if you can see that on the left side. So this one here, I'm not going to have a seam allowance there. I did it wrong the first time, but that's going to be your fold line. And so I just folded it in half and cut it out. And even though that says back version, that's wrong. It really was the front version. I have a hard time with 3D analysis sometimes. And here I'm correcting myself by writing front tie on there. And I decided you can put the not so part anywhere. This is where we're going to turn it inside out. But I decided to put it on the back collar on the lower portion. And here I'm just checking it out, make sure it looks good and it fits my garment. Next, we're going to cut our pieces out. So you want 4 layers of fabric. So 2 on the fold. And then also add your interfacing. So here I have 6 layers of fabric total. 2 interfacing and 4 layers of my crow fabric. I'm just going to cut that out carefully. And I have really sharp scissors so I could go through all 6 layers really well. The curves are a little bit harder, so I like using the little wheel pizza cutter. There you go. And that's what the 3 pieces look like. So off camera, I ironed the interfacing on. And here I've got good size facing inward. And now I'm just going to pin it together and get sewing on that. Now I'm going to sew around the entire thing except for that little section where I'm going to turn it inside out. There you go, 1/4 inch seam. You want to make sure that you get the point really well. And as far as the points go, I'm going to mention this a second. I actually kind of messed up, but that's okay. I think the way that I did it, I might make it my standard default way. What I should have done here is added my ribbon or my little elastic in the little corner or corners if you're doing the ribbon, but I didn't. And I realized that later, and so I just ended up taking out some stitches and dropping that in after the fact. Here you can see I left that spot so that I could turn it inside out. Here's the cord that I ended up using, the elastic cord. And like I said, I ended up picking out a couple little stitches out of that very corner. And what I'm going to do is basically slip that in there and then stitch over it again. First, I needed to pick my button and size it so that I knew how big I needed to make it. So, you know, you kind of want to make it just so it's a little bit tight around that button. And now I'm kind of getting geared up to kind of shove it there in the little corner. Now you can do this before you sew the whole thing up and not have to do any back stitches, but this was actually really quite easy, so I'm glad I did it this way. Now I'm pinning it in place so it doesn't move, and I'm going to back stitch the heck out of this thing. Basically, you want to do probably like at least 4 layers back and forth. You don't want to go too wild and crazy that it affects your point. So it's really, you know, you just gotta finesse it a little tiny bit. So you can see I looked at it, I liked it, and now I went back and did some more, and now I'm trimming the corners. And now that that's all done, I'm going to trim it. This is a round area, so you want to trim it really tightly. If you don't have those pinking shears, then you can make little cuts. I'm showing you here, and then that way when it stretches out, you can see it's got some give in there. And then what you can do for the inside curves is you make little notches, little V notches, and so that's what you can do. And that's a great way to do it. I really like the pinking shears. They're just a lot faster, and they have such a great edge on there, and I really like them. But you can do this too if you don't have them. But pinking shears are a good investment for your sewing projects. So there you go. I'm going to finish that up, and you want to make sure there's no lint anywhere, because we're going to turn it inside out, and if you have lint still stuck on the inside of your collar, it really sucks. I ended up with a piece of lint in my white collar, and you know, if it was the crow one, nobody's going to see it, but if you have something thin or something that's white, you do want to make sure it's really tight, really clean. And you can see how that little elastic came out. It looks so good. And don't use a lead, but I like using the mechanical pencils because they're kind of pointy, and able to get that. So now I'm going to take it to the iron and iron the seams out and press it really well. And you still have that little corner that's not completely sealed up. So you're going to want to iron the seams just right so that they are really easy to sew up. So you can see there, you can see I've got like a little 1/4 inch seam allowance on that, and that's where I'm going to end up sewing. All right. Next, it's button time. So find your fanciest vintage button that matches and sew that on. I prefer the buttons with the post, right? They don't have holes all the way through. They only have one hole on the back, the shank. So that's what I like. And here I'm just sewing it on, and now it's all complete. Oh, except for you have to finish the sewing on the back side. Now, if you don't like hand sewing, you can certainly just get some of that sewing tape strip stuff and just iron it closed. I think that that would be a really good way to do it. I don't think I have any, but I kind of wish that I had done that. But you can take the time and sew it. And this style one only has one set of hand sewing. The white one has 2 parts of hand sewing. All right, next we're going to do the back tie style, and I only need 1 sheet of paper to make this. We're going to add a 1/4 inch for the back side because we're not going to do this on the fold. We're going to add the 1/4 inch to the edge because it's going to be 2 separate pieces. We're not going to put this on the fold. And there I'm just rounding around the corner, tracing the rest of it out just as is. And there we're all ready to go to get it cut out. Now I'm labeling my pieces just so I don't get confused. It is easy to do. So now I'm going to piece it onto my garment and make sure that it fits. This one actually had a looser collar, so I needed to adjust it a little bit. And so first of all, I had my angle wrong on the shoulder line, so that helped close in the gap a little bit. And then what I ended up doing was just piecing a little bit of extra cardstock on my pattern piece so that it kind of closed in that gap. And it ended up being a little tiny bit angled, which was kind of interesting. But you do what you got to do. So there I'm just piecing it together. I'm going to put some tape on it, trim it out, and there you go. You got a new pattern piece adjusted for your garment. So you might have to do this at home if you're using my pattern piece that I gave you. Here I'm cutting out 4 layers of white fabric. And I also cut out 2 layers of interfacing. I wasn't planning on using interfacing. I thought it would be thick enough, but it really did help out a lot. These do not need to be on the fold. They are just 4 individual pieces. There you see, I've got those. And you'll want to piece them together so you have right sides facing inward. But these were identical from the outside to the inside. So now I'm going to sew along all the edges. I'm going to leave about a 2-inch opening on the edge. I like making sure that I round all the corners and then I leave my hand sewing on a straight edge. So this is going to be the back side of the collar. That's the lower edge of the collar. So here I am sewing that up. So this is a good time. You could tuck in your ribbons or your elastic when you're sewing this piece together. Like I said, I kind of messed up, but I think I would probably do it the same way. So opposite of your point on the back collar, you're going to slip in your little tiny bit of elastic. And, you know, when you just take out 2 or 3 stitches, it holds it really well. And then here I am back stitching and reinforcing it quite well. I went several times. You can see what that looks like. And then now I can just trim the edges of that elastic. And now it's trimming time. So again, pinking shears, you can manually do it with the scissors, cut all your little edges, and whatever I did on this one, you're going to do it a second time for your second collar. All right, and now you're going to turn these inside out. And again, just make sure you don't have any lint on, especially the white one. Like I said, I have a piece of lint trapped inside of my collar, and it's a little bit unfortunate, but whatever. And then, of course, if you use the mechanical pencil, make sure that the lead is put in. But I like it because it won't actually pierce your fabric. And then next, I'm taking it to the ironing board and pressing the seams out. And I'm going to make sure that all my corners are done very concisely, and then I'm going to tuck in that 1/4 inch seam allowance where I'm going to hand stitch and get that ready for hand sewing. Next, we're going to just do a whip stitch between those pieces, and this is technically on the back side of the collar. They're identical, but you just got to pick one side. So this is technically the back side, and so I'm just whip stitching a few stitches between them, and it looks really good from the front. And then I'm going to discreetly hide my knot kind of in between the 2 layers. And then you're going to flip it over to the front side, and then you're going to put your button on the front side. So it was identical just a moment ago, but when you put that button on, that's when you decided which side was the front. There you go. And then now I've just got to hand stitch the edges. And since these were 2 separate pieces, you have to do this twice, one on each side. And again, you can hand stitch it, or you can use some of that like fusible web or that no-sew iron tape, and that would be really nice too. There you go. So cute, so sweet. Altogether, it took me about 2 hours to finish both collars and film. All right, there you have it. 2 Peter Pan collars. So sweet, so cute, and I am so happy with how they turned out. So again, one from buttons from the front, one from the back, and of course, the fashion show. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me on Instagram or Facebook at Sarita V Pinup. Please like or subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I will be making more how-to videos, and most of my stuff focuses on vintage fashion, vintage photography, and the like. So I will see you in the future. Bye!